Hey, what's up, David? I appreciate you coming on my channel again. We had such a good time the last time. I know you're a wealth of knowledge. And for those who don't know who David Richardson is, he is the what are you, the executive VP or the vice president of training or something at
Vice
National
president of
Comfort
training's
Institute?
the fancy title.
Yeah, he's the head guru trainer from National Comfort Institute, which trains HVAC companies and their employees, right, on how to become more proficient at their career or how to dive deeper into the world of HVAC, right?
Right, right.
So today I wanted to have you on because you actually posted a blog recently. What was that website that you posted it to?
Contracting Business Magazine.
Okay, I'll put a link in the description to that because it was a great article. But the whole point of that article was about humidity problems in houses, and we're getting a lot of that throughout the United States right now. I know in Kentucky it's been 90 plus for the last month or so. And so I've been getting a lot of calls from people trying to get help with, making their homes more comfortable. What can I do about lowering the humidity? So and then I posted a video as well about the same time that you did your blog, and so I was like, this is a perfect discussion to dive into humidity in houses. So why don't you kind of kick it off and tell me from your perspective, like maybe the top 3 or 4 things that people should be aware of when it comes to lowering the humidity in their home, and like maybe some simple tweaks that they can do just with their own system without purchasing new equipment. What can they do?
Sure, be glad to. Well, and one of the easiest things, it's any homeowner can do this. Go to your thermostat. If you're having humidity issues, go to your thermostat and look at the fan setting. And of course, the fan is what's in your indoor unit that blows either hot or cold air. And see that that fan setting is in the on position. If it is, you want to change that setting to where it goes to the auto position. So let me explain the
Right.
difference between what those do. Fan on means that the fan will run nonstop. So if you've got a thermostat that's calling for cooling, it's not a big deal. But when that thermostat says, hey, I've got enough cooling, I'm going to shut the equipment down, the fan continues to run. Well, a lot
Right.
of times the indoor coil, often you'll hear it referred to as an evaporator, is going to be really cold while the outdoor unit is running. So it'll be below what's called dew point temperature. You may see this on the weather. And anytime a surface is below dew point, water vapor in the air will condense on it. It'll run down. Easiest way to think of this is like a glass of iced tea outside. You'll see water droplets form on the outside. Well, your air conditioner does the same thing with humidity. The humidity hits the cold coil and it runs down your drain. If you've ever had a stopped up drain, that's where that condensate's coming from. If the fan's on, as that fan continues to run, that moisture on the coil, it'll actually get reintroduced into the airstream and it can
Yeah, the
actually
air blows
raise,
past it.
yes, can actually raise the indoor humidity levels. So it's a simple fix. Switch it back to auto.
Yeah. So what do you say? Because I had a recent customer who had that same situation, and he told me that he had set the fan. It was actually an Ecobee thermostat, and he set his settings so that it ran 50 minutes of the hour all the time. And I
Uh-huh.
explained to him just exactly the same that you just said, but he's like, but the problem is I don't get good air circulation throughout my house. It's too warm on the second floor and it's too cold on the bottom floor. And so his logic was that keeping the fan moving was going to, distribute the air more carefully, which did not work very well in his house. It was over 70% relative humidity inside his house.
Well, a lot of times, if you're running into a building, if your house is like really hot on the second floor and really cold down on the first floor, you could be fighting an HVAC problem. You may also be fighting a building problem. And
Yeah,
that's where you
for
start
sure.
to get into another one of the most common problems that I know you deal with a ton, Eric, is duct leakage. Because
That's
duct
right.
leakage actually change how air moves inside of a building. And it can actually
That's right.
pull hot attic air, right into the HVAC system or into the house that the air conditioner is trying to cool and dehumidify. And many times it just can't.
Yeah. And the sad thing is I see this even in new construction because a lot of places the code is not enforced on for the duct leakage part of things, especially in Kentucky, especially in rural areas in the United States. So even if you have a new house, if that ductwork is located in a crawl space that's ventilated or in a garage or in an attic especially, it's going to, if there's return side leakage there, it's going to pull that hot humid air into the ductwork and then circulate it all throughout your house. So that just makes your air
And you
conditioner
mentioned the
work
crawl
harder.
space too. That's a big one
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
most crawl spaces are they're damp and newer cooling equipment doesn't remove as much moisture as the older equipment did. A lot of times you may say, my older equipment's this new stuff is not the same, and it's not. The older equipment was a lot more tolerant of poor installation practices. The newer equipment is you have to be much more precise. It's more precision based. So you have to really be careful with what you do and the setup and the installation and how you start it up and commission it. All these are very important. You can't just put it in and turn it on. Used to be able to get away with that and we can't now. And with duct leakage on the return side in the crawl space, if it overwhelms the moisture removal side of the air conditioner, then there's no room left to dehumidify the home.
So, I mean, most people have no clue about that thing right there that you just said. They're expecting they get a new air conditioner that it's going to work better than their old air conditioner that was there for 10 or 20 years. And what you're saying is that it has less capacity to remove the moisture from the air than the older air conditioner did. So, why is that?
A lot of it has to do with efficiency ratings. In order to get higher efficiency air conditioners, they put larger indoor coils in them. And a lot of times those indoor coils are run a little bit warmer than the older ones did. So they don't quite remove as much moisture. So what happens is, unless the installing contractor is setting up the fans correctly, and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll set the fan at a lower speed so that there's more contact time for the air that's passing across that coil, lets the temperature get cooler so it'll remove more moisture. But
Okay.
unfortunately, a lot of times when the equipment's installed, it's just assumed that the fan is set correctly.
Right.
And unfortunately, it may be moving way too much air. And
Yeah.
then you get into the equipment side where there's two different sides of an air conditioner. If you look at it, there's one side of it that actually drops the air temperature. And then there's the second side, which is the moisture removal side. And sometimes there's a different split. The more of your air conditioner's capacity that goes to lowering the air temperature, the less of it that goes to moisture removal. So
Right.
there's a fine balance there that only contractors who are using the right design software will know. So there's a happy medium there that has to be met. So just slapping it in and turning it on oftentimes is going to end up in these humidity problems that we've found in our area. I know a lot
Right.
recently.
Yeah, and so there's 2 things that you mentioned there. One is they can make sure that their thermostat is not set to run all the time, and so that won't be contributing to the moisture problem. And then the second is the fan airspeed.
Yes.
So if the fan is blowing really cold air out, but your humidity inside the house is too high, then adjusting the fan speed lower can actually remove more moisture from the air, right?
Yes. Yes, and depending on
Okay.
the equipment that you've got, this is usually something that you'll wanna leave to a professional to let them get set. Many of the new equipment controllers, if you know how to do it, you can actually set it up yourself, but you may end up messing some stuff up. So if
Yeah.
if you didn't see your contractor go through a pretty detailed commissioning process and they didn't provide you any type of records or documentation on what they adjusted and how it was set up, what the
Mhm.
measurements were, chances are pretty high they just put it in and turned it on.
Yeah. And, yeah, chances are extremely high they just
Turned it
put it
on.
in and turned it on because they don't most HVAC contractors don't actually do commissioning on residential systems, right? So this
It
is another
takes
big
time.
problem in the industry.
It does. It takes time, but it's what there's a our industry got off track about 50 years ago when there was a push for energy efficiency. And we started looking at the HVAC equipment as the system. Well, unfortunately, they're
Mhm.
two totally different things. Just because you buy a certain name brand of equipment, that's just a component in the system that the contractor builds. So you could have a unit with a certain name installed by a contractor who does poor work, and you'll get a poor system. You can have that same piece of equipment, same brand name by a contractor who does high quality work. They do it by the book, and you'll have an excellent, high performing system, and they can prove it. Now, the
Yeah,
difference in that is you'll pay the same price for the equipment, but you'll pay far more for the craftsmanship and the knowledge that goes into that. So, not all
yeah,
HVAC systems are created the same.
yeah, and that system should last quite a bit longer if it's
Yes.
been installed properly and confirmed, right?
Yes.
So whether you pay a little bit more upfront for a better contractor to install it the right way, or you pay less upfront and then your system dies
Yes.
prematurely in 5 years, like one of my daughter's friends' parents just bought this house in Crestwood 5 years ago, and the upstairs system has already died. It was a Lennox unit, and he's explaining this to me, and I'm like, "There's some underlying cause for why this happened." And he's like, "Well, I'm just gonna buy another system." So I start sending him my videos and talking to him about some of the stuff that we talk about, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, I never realized this." And he's an engineer. He's not a mechanical engineer, but so now he's, like, getting some second opinions and getting some different options and things, so that's really important, and I think a lot of people need to understand that.
Because it is going to affect
So
the humidity.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit. What are some other things that we can look at? Like, where is the humidity coming from? Like, it's obviously humid outside, right? So in my experience, most of that air leakage, the air leakage in the house is where a lot of that humid, hot air comes into the home. And some of the top ones that I talk about are like, if you have a bunch of recessed lights in your house and they're not sealed, recessed lights are generally very leaky. You can have it coming in through leaky windows and doors, but that's usually not the first thing that I would look for. What are some other places that you would recommend people check out?
Well, chimneys. If you have any type of a chimney, that's a wide open duct to the outside.
Yeah, fireplaces.
Yeah, fireplaces. So if you've
Yeah,
got a clothes dryer inside, anytime that you turn it on, air is trying to come back inside from wherever it can get it because that dryer is exhausting air outside. That air has to be replaced. So if you've
yeah,
got a nice big open fireplace, it'll pull outside air right down it.
yeah.
Any opening, it'll try to get it from.
I actually had that exact same situation a few weeks ago. I went to do a follow-up inspection on a guy's house that I did an audit for 3 or 4 years ago, and I was doing the retest on his house, and my mistake, I forgot to check his fireplaces. There was 2 in his house, and neither one of them had the dampers closed on the fireplaces, and so it was like after I closed the dampers on those 2 fireplaces, it dropped the air leakage in his house by almost 600 CFM. Which
Wow.
was huge, and he
Yeah.
didn't realize that they were open, and it had been open probably since last winter, whenever the last time is that he used it. So, right away, check your fireplace dampers.
Yep. And some of your customers may be commercial customers. Depending on the size of the equipment in different settings, they will bring in outside air for ventilation and they'll bring those in through a dedicated duct. A lot of times you'll see large units called package units out on the ground or up on
Mhm.
the roof, and they have an accessory on them called an economizer. And just like every other portion of the HVAC system we talked about that has to be set up correctly, so do these. If they're not, they'll bring a ton of outside air in that piece of equipment's trying to cool down. Well, if you combine that with the fan on, and then you're bringing air off of usually a very hot roof, it can actually raise the temperature inside. So not only that, I mean, this is not just a residential issue. This is an issue in commercial building.
Yeah. And to that same point with commercial buildings, so it always cracks me up when I go to like, maybe I'll go out to the outlet mall, and in the middle of the summertime, they will have the doors open to the stores in the outlet mall, and it's 90 degrees outside and super humid. I'm like, "What do you guys think is happening right now?" And the system's just running all the time. So, you're not helping anything at all. Actually, my church has the same problem. One of the pastors at my church was explaining how they couldn't get the humidity right inside one
Hmm.
of the buildings, and I'm like, "It's because your doors are open all the time, letting everybody in and being welcoming." I'm like, "Just you have airlock doors, shut the doors, let people open them as they come in and out, and it's going to help the problem, I promise you."
Yes. It's amazing how it all works together because, we've talked about the house working, and I know one that we investigated a long time ago. They had moisture issues. They had the hot second floor, if I remember right, and the super
Yeah,
cold second floor, and they actually had moisture condensing on the drywall. So depending on the climate that you're in, if you
yeah,
start going a lot further south, I mean, it can actually start to you can have condensation inside the walls, and that leads
yeah.
to biological growth inside the walls, all kind of nasty stuff happening.
So that's actually another great point. So one of the things that you might find in your house, if you're thinking about this, I've got high humidity in my house. What are the signs that I have a problem? Because some people are actually comfortable at higher humidity levels and they don't really care. They'll just turn the thermostat down to a colder temperature to be comfortable, but the humidity's still high. But one of the things that you can look for is ductwork that's sweating. So
Right.
the registers, the supply registers, you look up if they're on the ceiling and you have an attic space up there, that duct is trying to move like 55-degree air through an attic that could be 130 to 150 degrees and it's full of humidity. And a lot of times what I find is that the boot that actually penetrates through the drywall, there's two things. A lot of times the insulation doesn't actually cover the entire boot up in the attic, so you have this metal that's really cold in contact with really hot, really humid air temperature in the attic. And then the other thing I find a lot is there's a gap that never gets sealed between that metal boot and the drywall. So if you actually took down the register, you generally are going to find a quarter-inch gap or so, sometimes even bigger than that, between the drywall and the boot. And that in new construction is the number one thing that will cause a house to fail a duct leakage test is not sealing those boots. It's also what can cause all the discoloration that you see around your boot on the ceilings. If your house has those kind of sweating registers and you start seeing the discoloration on the drywall, there's a pretty good chance that that gap's not been sealed and that the duct has not been insulated properly.
Point. And low airflow too, it can also be a cause of it. If you've got very low airflow, it can also cause the registers to sweat. So it doesn't have to be like that. Like you pointed out, Eric, a couple of simple solutions can fix that problem.
But David, you told me to lower the airflow so that it helps remove moisture from the air, and now you're telling me that lower airflow is gonna cause a problem.
So let's talk about context. Airflow has to be within certain limits. If it's too low, then you can end up with all kinds of problems, like the indoor coil freezing. You can have a lot of problems. If the airflow is too high, then it's actually blowing the air past the coil so fast that it doesn't have a chance to remove the moisture. So if you find that whenever the HVAC system comes on and it feels like it's blowing really hard and the air's just not that cold, there's a good possibility, although it's rare, that you may be moving too much air. That
Yeah,
happens.
yeah, absolutely, especially in oversized systems on ductwork that's too small. It just blows out like a blowtorch, basically.
There's another one. Going back to the equipment. Most HVAC equipment is oversized, and we've been using rules of thumb that only apply to houses built in 1973. We still use them today in houses built, 2025 in the last 15 years. We
Yeah,
still use those same rules of thumb, and it has caused equipment to be drastically oversized. So unless you live in a house that was built in 1973 and it has had no updates whatsoever, if someone comes in and they use some rule of thumb like 500 square feet per ton, your HVAC equipment is likely going to be oversized.
yeah,
Another thing
and
that you can look for is if you mentioned replacement earlier, Eric. If someone comes in and all they do is they read the data plate tag, there's usually a nameplate on every piece of HVAC equipment. If all they do is they get the equipment size or capacity off of that data plate and they say that's what your replacement equipment needs to be, chances are high you're still going to have an oversized piece of equipment. And just remember, newer equipment is a lot more precise in how it needs to be set up and installed than the older stuff. So your old one might not have had a problem. Your new one will.
yeah. And so, like, I had a situation like this recently where 2 twin systems were replaced. The furnaces were replaced, but the, air conditioners were not. And a problem developed after the new furnaces were installed because they were pushing out a lot more air, and the velocity of that air was just washing the walls and the ceilings of 2 places in particular in this house, to the point where it was freezing the plaster, and the temperature difference between the inside of the plaster and the outside of the plaster caused it to crack and fall apart. So it was, again, the systems were too big for sure for this
Uh-huh.
house, but then one simple change to a furnace created an air conditioning issue as well. So that goes back to the ECM motors now that are in furnaces, which are the variable speed electronically commutated motors versus the standard speed older ones. They push more air and they can cause this kind of stuff to happen.
Great point. And they have to be, as we go back to it, they have to be set up right.
Yeah. So what would you say to, somebody who's having this kind of thing in their house? What We talked about the thermostat, we talked about
Uh-huh.
the airflow, checking, make sure ductwork is sealed. What other things can we look for to try to fix this kind of situation or at least improve it?
I want to go back to what you'd mentioned about the can lights because there's a lot to be said about unintentional openings to like an attic because it's hard to dehumidify or cool if you've got 130, 140-degree attic air coming into a space. Looking in your ceiling, anything in your ceiling like attic access, the can lights, the HVAC system, as you mentioned, if it's in the attic, that is one large connection to your ceiling. And if it leaks, that's going to be a problem. The other is if you have a home that has a central return grill. And what I mean by that, that's where the air pulls back into the HVAC system. If you have just one or two of those in a main area of the home, you have to be very aware of what happens with door closures. If you find yourself, it's like it's only humid, it's sometimes of the day, then you may be chasing what are called room pressure imbalances. And what happens is the doors actually act as dampers inside of your home. So when you shut the door, you're actually closing off an airflow pathway from, say, a bedroom back to that central return. So if you've got a large grill, say like 20 inches by 20 inches, that has a filter inside of it, pay attention to your doors. If your doors are all closed and you're having the humidity problem, but then it seems to magically disappear when you open your doors, you may have some type of a room pressure imbalance. And this is
Yeah.
where testing comes in, a professional like Eric coming in and looking at your home to be able to recommend a solution for that.
Yeah, and I posted a video recently that was just specifically about that pressure imbalance issue, and in that particular house, it was the basement was completely depressurized because all the air going back to the equipment was coming from the basement instead of the 1st and 2nd floor. There was a complete disconnection between the return trunk line in the basement and the panned-in wall cavities above it. So, I think 90% of the air was coming from the basement, and if you shut the door to the basement even halfway and the system was running, it would shut itself like that.
And this, you just led me to think about another humidity issue. It usually doesn't happen during the winter, much more, or the summer. It's more of a winter issue. But I got to tie this in with safety. If you have that type of a problem in a basement and there's a natural draft water heater down there that's,
Yep,
gas fired, that could actually create a serious safety situation. So not only a humidity problem, but a safety situation. I mean, there was just a carbon monoxide death in Lexington 2 days ago, and an entire
man.
apartment complex cleared out. And the details are still coming out on it, but I mean, it affected the whole complex, and apparently they had an actual gas leak itself. So I mean, there wasn't even an explosion hazard there. So
Wow. Yeah, and this house did have it had a natural draft water heater, and it also had the clothes dryer in the same closet in the basement, so if the dryer's running, if the water heater's running, and the furnace is running all at the same time, and you have this return side duct leakage, it's going to depressurize and potentially cause backdrafting issues. So that was one of the things that I noted to him, and I was like, "You definitely need to have, a carbon monoxide detector down here at minimum, and a good one."
yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Excellent points. I mean, with any of these problems that you pointed out, Eric, a lot of it is eliminating one at a time. And I think one of the biggest thing is start with the most obvious, which is the fan on. It has amazed me. My son is a industrial maintenance tech, and a lot of the issues that he's dealing with right now at the factory that he goes into is they are leaving the fan in the on position, whether it's a
yeah,
small office space or a large area where they're doing production. He's like, it's simple. Once we fix that, he's like, a lot of it's going away. And
yeah.
then he's finding other things like the economizers have never been set up and the louvers are all the way open. So it's all kinds of
And
craziness.
I feel like it's like, it's like banging your head against a wall when you're explaining this to people because they're like, "But my HVAC contractor told me to leave the fan on all the time. But I've always done this. I've always heard of this," and I'm like, "They're all wrong. I'm sorry to tell you, but they are all wrong, and here's why. If you wanna leave the fan on in heating mode, I don't care. If you wanna leave the fan on all the time and you're not cooling, and it's the shoulder seasons, I don't care. But in cooling mode, do not leave the fan on constantly. It's going to cause you problems, humidity problems in particular."
Yeah. As soon as you start dealing with, you throw a wet coil into the mix, it changes everything.
Yeah. So let's kind of switch gears. I want to talk about the other big thing that I'm hearing and seeing online, all these questions about is how do I even out the temperatures in my house? Like even if I have a ranch style house and it's whether it's on a crawl space or a basement, and you've got maybe it's really long, and so you've got master bedroom on this side and you've got the kids rooms on that side or whatever, and they're like, there's a 10-degree temperature difference between one side to the other, which usually it's not that bad, but it feels like it is. Or you have, a multi-story house where the top floor is always warmer than the basement or the first floor. What are some things that we can do to improve those types of situations?
Okay. Well, the first, and you're going to be limited on a lot of times what you can do with this, but I'm going to go back to one of those very basic things again is make sure that your air filter's clean,
Yeah.
because many times a lot of comfort problems are tied directly to lack of airflow. So the simplest thing, if the first question that you ask is, "Where's my air filter?" Good sign that you need it changed. And don't change the filter with one of the small 1 inch, very restrictive ones that you'll get at your local home goods store. Typically, the more that you pay for a 1 inch filter, the more restrictive to airflow it's going to be. Think about it like you're putting a piece of cardboard in there, basically. It's just letting a little bit of air through. They
Yeah,
do
the
make deeper
high
filters that you can get, very high efficiency ones that have a much lower pressure drop or resistance to airflow so they can breathe easier and you'll get improved filtration. So first opinion is start there. That's something every homeowner can do.
Yeah.
After that,
Especially if you continue to get like, if your egg coil continues to freeze up every year, it's absolutely the first thing you should look for is the air filter. Are you using a
yes.
high efficiency or an allergen reduction air filter? get rid of it. Just buy a cheaper one and replace it more often, or look at the size of the ductwork. Even if the return side's too small, it might be part of the problem.
There's a myth that a clean filter is okay. We've proven that wrong time and time again just through a couple of simple measurements.
Yeah. Yep. It's called a pressure drop.
Yeah.
Takes about 5 minutes to do, and any HVAC contractor should be able to do it. But frankly, most of them still do not.
Unfortunately, that's the case. That's why we're trying to raise the bar.
That's right.
Uh, and then the next steps is when you start to get into looking at the equipment. If once that you have made sure that you've got a filter in there, make sure that all your registers and grills are open. I know a lot of times something that we used to run into a lot when I was a contractor is people taking like cheesecloth and putting it in the supply registers trying to filter the air because they had dust problems.
Mm,
That creates a lot of resistance. So, just make sure that the supply registers are open. There's a myth about, I'm going to shut the registers in any or the vents that are in the floor or the ceiling to any rooms that I don't use. And that can
yeah.
create a lot of problems. So make sure
Yeah.
that they're all unobstructed and that you can actually get the air out. Then you'll want to probably get an HVAC contractor involved to actually test to look through your system and make sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to on the equipment side. And then you get into the ducts just because the equipment works correctly. A colleague of mine, we were just testing down in East Tennessee a couple of weeks ago, and we found that the equipment was doing almost everything it was rated to do from the laboratory. It was awesome. But because of the conditions that this system was installed in, the ducts, he was losing almost a ton and a half of capacity through the duct system. And no
Wow.
one would have known this if they hadn't measured or we hadn't measured.
Right.
So it looked at first like his equipment was oversized. And technically, for what's called a load calculation or a heat loss and a heat gain calculation, and then the equipment selection procedures, the equipment was too big. But then once you took into account those duct losses, the amount of BTUs, which is heat, that was being removed from the living space was equal to what the load calculation called for. So it's kind of weird how it all worked out.
Yeah. So check the air filter to get better airflow through the duct system. What else can we do to kind of equalize temperatures? Keep doors open. You
Doors
mentioned that.
open. Doors open's another one.
Registers open. You just mentioned
Registers
that one.
open. And then once you get it, if you've done all that and you're still having problems, and this is where the measurement side comes in, you're going to have someone come out and do some measurements and then compare those to industry standards to see if they're within a certain tolerance, usually plus or minus 10%. And if they're not, then that's a sign of some areas that can be taken care of and improved. And a lot of times, most duct systems, as you said, Eric, are undersized. They need some form of help. And if you've got the right size piece of equipment in, it's going to be crucial to that. Now, if the equipment's oversized and the right size equipment's put in, then the duct system that may have been undersized now may be a lot closer to being right size
Yeah. Yeah.
because you have to
So
move less
downsize.
air.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the closing of the supply registers is a really common one that I see,
Yes.
especially in the summertime, because in the wintertime, the warm air rises, it gets to the second floor, but in the summertime, when you have a multi-story house, you really need to not only push that cold air to the second floor, but you need to pull it back, the hot air back down to the equipment. And so what I've seen a lot is that they'll close all the registers on the first floor and even in the basement, attempting to push more air to the second floor, and it really doesn't work that way. And I've tried to explain to them, like, you're trying to restrict pressure at the outlet of each of these registers when it
Hmm.
needs to be restricted at the trunk line,
Yeah.
because that's what's going to divert the airflow more evenly, right?
Yep.
So
Exactly right.
it doesn't work. On the same train of thought, I want to hear your thoughts on these smart vents that you see online being sold, where it can
Yeah.
supposedly like measure the static pressure and open them or close them to get more. What do you think about these?
It's a it's a technologically advanced way of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's all it is. Now, granted, if the duct system's sized correctly, and that's a big if, then these devices may work. But there's so many variables that go into it. And then sometimes just the selection of the vent style that you have in your floor may unintentionally choke off air. One of the worst, I know, Eric, you see this, I've seen it, are the hardwood style registers.
Yes.
They're pretty much closed off even when they're open. So
Yeah.
even the type of a register that you have in your floor or sealant makes a big difference. So you
Yeah.
want to make sure, as you said, Eric, that the air can actually blow and that it's not being choked off before it ever has a chance to make it into the home.
Yeah. I mean, if you really wanna blow your mind, if anybody's watching this and you have wood floor registers in your house, go pull one of them up and look at the underside of that register and tell me if it's covered in mold, mildew, or other gross things, because I bet you it is. Because the other thing is when you have a wood floor, and this happened in my house, is when the floor gets, polyurethaned and stained in polyurethane, they don't do the underside of the vents. They cover that. So now you have raw wood that's exposed to humid air hitting that thing and dust and whatever else hits it, and it just accumulates and it can grow stuff over time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason that the building codes don't allow wood as supply ducts.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
Yeah. So for some reason they allow it in the return ducts in
Correct.
our part of the country. Floor cavities and wall cavities and yet drywall and wood, but that's a whole nother topic of
That is another
discussion.
topic, but a big one.
Yeah. So yeah, the smart vents, I don't think they work very well. They're not going to cut the pressure where it needs to be at the trunk line, and they're kind of really just gimmicky in my opinion.
They're not gonna save you any money. There's a lot of promises out there. They're not gonna save you any money.
No. Any other things that you can think of to try to equalize temperatures between floors or different parts of the house that we haven't touched on yet?
Going past the HVAC system, I think you need to look at how well your house is air sealed and insulated. It's
Absolutely.
because, the HVAC system, it's designed to remove heat during the cooling season and remove moisture. But if your home is letting so much of that heat back in and that moisture back in, like you said earlier, Eric, you might as well have all the doors open. That's
Yeah.
essentially what you're doing. It's just from hidden places that you can't see.
Yeah. And speaking of doors being open, check your windows. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a house and they haven't realized that a window is just cracked open just a little bit, or it didn't completely lock and so it kind of shifted out of place or whatever. Check all your exterior windows, make sure they're shut and locked. Draw some shades too. If you have
Great point.
windows or glass doors that face south or west, especially, I mean, you're going to get tons of heat gain through those windows in the summertime. So either have exterior shading to block the sun from coming through those areas in the first place, which is the best situation, or get blinds or shades or something on there.
Now, the only extreme situations, they make solar screens that you can use to help that. But
Yeah.
rarely is, unless you've just got some really old ratty windows, isn't necessary to go all new windows unless you
Yeah.
just want to or need to.
Yeah. Unless you just want the aesthetic, your windows don't open or they look like crap and you want to replace them with something new.
Right.
But there's a lot you can do with existing windows without spending 600 to $1,000 per window.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's definitely not the best return on investment.
Right. And in some spaces, you'd mentioned the basement, Eric. I have a dehumidifier running in my basement right now because it doesn't I don't get a whole lot of cooling down here. There's no need for it. So I have to get rid of that moisture through a secondary source. So you
Yeah.
may find yourself that as maybe you upgrade your equipment and you find that during the shoulder seasons, especially if you've got a very high performance home that's spray foamed or structural insulated panels, that sort of thing, that you may have to put in a dedicated dehumidification system.
Yeah.
So not all homes are built the same.
Yeah. And even a portable dehumidifier, like, I have the same thing in my basement. The air doesn't really I block off all the vents in the summertime because it's cold as it doesn't
Yep.
need to be any colder, right?
Yeah.
I want that cold air coming to the 1st and 2nd floor, so dehumidification is super important. Making sure that you have a sump pump, that has a crock, make sure that thing is covered so
Yeah.
any moisture that gets down there isn't just evaporating up into your basement. There's another easy one that you
Yeah.
could do.
Fish tanks.
Fish tanks are another one. Yeah, if you got a 40-gallon fish tank or a bigger, I mean, they're just constantly evaporating
If you have an
the water
indoor
into your
pond, you're in trouble.
yeah,
If you've got an
boiling
indoor pool, that whole area needs to be handled completely different.
yeah, that's right. If you're boiling water inside your house, you better be using an exhaust fan to get that moisture out while you're boiling water.
Yep. Same thing with
Or just
taking showers
yep,
because
taking
now you're
showers,
generating moisture internally.
yep. Run that exhaust fan before it starts and for probably 5 to 10 minutes at
Yes.
least after the shower's done. So
Yes.
all these things are great simple tips for the most part that you can just change their habits or their settings that you can change on your own to lower the humidity and improve the comfort inside your house. And I think more people need to be aware of this kind of stuff because I still see silly posts online about doing this trick or that hack or whatever, and it's just you know it's not going to work. It just there's some real stuff that you can do like what we've been talking about, and it should help a lot. So
And sometimes the fixes, as you said, are simple, but other times you do need there are some more advanced testing and things that need to be done to really get to the root of the problem. So what you want to be sure is you're not do the simple things, but make sure that you're not guessing and just trying to see what'll stick against the wall if you're really diving deep into an advanced humidity problem.
Anything else you'd like to leave us with on this topic, or do you think we covered
We've
it pretty
covered
well?
quite a bit. I'm sure if we thought
Yeah.
about it, we could cover a lot more, but at this moment, it's all I can think of.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, again, I appreciate you coming on and talk with me. It's always good to talk to you. I always learn something from you every time,
Same
and
here.
I know the audience learns from you every time. So much appreciated, David. And then I will definitely schedule another one with you, and we'll dive into some late summer
Sounds
stuff, maybe
good.
some allergy issues or dust or something like that.
That sounds good. Looking forward to it, Eric. Thanks again for having me on.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye bye.
Still rolling, but I will stop that.